Welcome to the Negotiatex podcast. My name is Nolan Martin. I'm the co-host and co-founder of Negotiatex. My good friend and co-founder is also with me, but Aaron, we also have another guest on today, following up from Luke from last week. So, do you want to introduce Mike?
Yeah, I will. And again, we're grateful to have somebody else on to talk, so it's not just you and me. For our listeners, one of the things I have loved about this field of negotiation is the number of different people I've met along the way who are in the field, working in in parallel and side by side organizations and learning from them. And about a decade ago, I can't believe it's been that long, Mike. I had the opportunity to get connected. I don't even remember how we got connected. So maybe Mike, one of the first things you tell me that, but to at the time, Officer Mike Baker of the LAPD SWAT crisis negotiation team, where he spent 29 years serving. Prior to that, Mike Baker had been an Army Airborne Ranger serving in Alaska in an Arctic Ranger company. He's did some time as a facilitator at BU's Master of Criminal Justice program, and now as a trainer with American Airlines. And it was just, I could tell we were kind of cut from similar cloth years ago when we met. Mike hosted some West Point cadets for us, took them through some of the ins and outs and drills out in LA of his work there. He came out to West Point a couple times as a guest speaker, working with our classes. And so, Mike, it's just a pleasure and honor to welcome you to this to our program. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't remember who you are. I'm just kidding. I can tell you how old I really am. It's like a decade ago. I can't believe that either. And as far as being cut from the same cloth, I think mine might be more from like a shroud or something that maybe was around the body of Christ or something. And yours might be something a little more, probably modern. Yeah. But yeah, same thing. Yeah. Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Hey, listen, for our listeners, tell us a little bit about what crisis negotiation is.
Crisis negotiation. Well, I guess first off, I think it's a little different than negotiating in business. I think I'd like to think that I think the major difference, although there are a lot of similarities between the type of negotiation you do in both situations. But I think what crisis negotiation, absent in crisis negotiation, which is a powerful tool, I think, in any kind of negotiation, is the ability to establish a relationship with somebody you're talking and trust with someone, which is so important, I think, and valuable in resolving any kind of crisis that's going on. So I think crisis negotiating is just like any kind of negotiation, absent the fact that you are limited a lot of times as far as the amount of time that you have to get the job done, which could be a huge problem.
What you just talked about with active listening and kind of hearing their concerns, I remember you referring to that in the past as a hook, and the power of being able to find that hook. Did that become a common practice for you? And how would you define that for our listeners, this idea of finding a hook with somebody that you're, in the midst of a, negotiation with?
Well, I will say, let's see, I try to keep things short, but you know how that goes. You've been with me before. Well, let's suffice to say that when you applied for the SWAT team with the Los Angeles Police Department and went through tryouts, if you were admitted into the department as a SWAT operator, one of the classes that you had to do was 8 hours of what they call CN2, crisis negotiation training. Everybody is required to do that on the unit. Our members of our unit although we serve in different cadres within the unit. For example, I was a sniper. I was also an assaulter. I was an EMT. I was a negotiator. I was also a climber. Those are different cadres within the department, within the unit itself. Some units have exclusive people. They're just snipers. They're SWAT snipers, and that's it. We did it all. But some of the cadres you weren't allowed to get into unless you showed that you had some kind of potential there and were good at what you did. Crisis negotiating was one of them. I took the 8-hour class because we all had to go through 8 hours of training. After I finished it, I said, there's no way in the world I ever want to do that. And I think the lieutenant of the SWAT team said something along the lines of, don't worry, I would never ask you to be part of this unit. I think he didn't see anything in me, any potential. And at the time, I had no interest in it. I was a young cop. I went on the SWAT team for one thing, probably the same thing I wanted to be a ranger for. I wanted to go blow things up and go. I felt there was only one way to resolve, crime and problems in the city and crisis in the city, is that was through brute force, and I wanted to be part of that. And I only learned later on in my career that, that is a method that can be used, but I think it's probably one of the least constructive. And I found out one of the most constructive was negotiating. I found that out when I was forced into a negotiation position as a sniper, believe it or not. I was a sniper on a unit, and I don't know how much of the story you want me to tell. I'm referencing that the first time that ever was exposed to negotiation, period, in an actual live situation, and that was the situation with the individual who was suicidal. He had a gun to his head on between a couple houses in the north section of Los Angeles. Earlier in the day, he had murdered his wife, who was actually sitting alongside their baby girl inside her vehicle. He had shot and killed her numerous times, shot her, and obviously she dies only once. But anyway, so that they had patrol had located him later on in the day, and he was sitting between a few. I believe there were apartments on a grassy hillside in the northeast section of Los Angeles with a gun to his head. They had him surrounded, and SWAT was called out to that situation because it was considered a barricade, and they were unable to resolve it. When I got up there, I was immediately deployed to go up behind or in the area of a black and white vehicle where one of the patrol officers, a young kid who was fairly new on the job, was actually actively negotiating with this gentleman. And I was just supposed to be protecting him as well as protecting the advancing SWAT officers who were at the time taking up positions and relieving the inner perimeter of containment on this individual, so he couldn't get outside that area with that gun and do any more damage. So I was covering them as well as covering this young cop who was trying to negotiate with the guy. It was obvious to me, even though I wasn't experienced as a negotiator, that he was having trouble, and I understand that. It's no fault of his. We're not trained. Most police officers aren't trained in negotiation or talking to people like that. And he was saying a lot of the wrong things, I guess you'd say, and our lieutenant got wind of that, radioed me in my headset and told me that I need to take over negotiations. You need to relieve this kid, and they'll bring up another sniper guy to cover me. So at that point, I took over negotiations with this gentleman. It was the first time I'd ever negotiated with anyone. And the same lieutenant that told me I would never negotiate put me in that position. So I think, over the couple of years that I'd been serving under him, he got an idea that maybe I was kind of good at what I did. I don't know. But long negotiations, I would say that it probably took, close to, I can't remember, but it was hours and hours out there. I would say 3-4 hours at least that we were out there negotiating with this person. End result, without talking about everything that had in between, unless you have questions about it, is that he peacefully gave up, put the gun down, and came down, and I received him, and others, he came right to me and gave up. We handcuffed him and took him to jail. And and the end result of that was there were no civil lawsuits, no litigations against us. In fact, his parents came up and thanked me, which was, thanked me for taking their son to jail. I mean, it was obvious he was going to jail for a long time, possibly life. During the process of negotiating, he admitted, out loud that he had killed his wife. It wasn't like it was something that they had to investigate later or get a confession out of him. He did it, right out there in front of the whole world. So he was going to jail, and he knew it. But I guess the main thing I did in that whole negotiation process was to reassure him that there is a chance that if he lived, he might be able to accomplish some of the things that he wanted to accomplish and he was frustrated with and thought he never would be able to do. And so that happened through, I think, something that you and I both know is active listening, I think, more than anything. Asking a lot of questions, listening to what he's saying and hearing what he's saying at the same time, and figuring out how we can use that information to maybe, resolve the situation. So it was a learning experience on the job thing. It was a success. I can't say all of mine were successes, but that one was, and it definitely, I would say probably put fire underneath my desire to want to do more of that. I mean, we actually, I've been in shootings before and resolved situations that way because they had to be done that way. It was a tactical resolution and it had to be done that way. But I got a better feeling solving something this way than I did ever, doing something tactically, which I thought meant something to me. And maybe this might be something that I might be good at, might enjoy doing more of. So, yeah. Well, it's like finding, let's see. I don't even know if this is a good analogy or not, but it's like finding that treasure map that actually leads to a treasure. It's like, you're looking all over, digging holes all over the place and not finding anything. And all of a sudden laying right there is a map that shows you exactly where the treasure is. And that's kind of like what it is. When you find that hook, then it's like, you got him. You've now got control of the situation. And I'm not, and it would be great to find that early in the process, but usually you don't find that until you establish some type of relationship with somebody and someone trusts you enough to start talking to you and giving you information about themselves that you can think about and ask yourself why when you hear some of the responses that he gives to some of your questions, and
So Mike, you're just telling us about the patience it takes to build a relationship, to asking these questions, to find that hook. I love the analogy of finding the treasure map. I think that is just relevant in a number of contexts. So the question I have is really about, many of our listeners are never going to be faced kind of with the situation you were faced that day, someone who had just, committed murder. And I have to imagine there's a little bit of emotional, for you to connect with them, that part of you. How did you throughout your career kind of manage this piece of saying, I need to build a relationship with this person to accomplish this? But boy, this is somebody who, I don't approve of or don't like a whole lot or something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would say not only generally across the board in negotiations, whether I was doing crisis intervention on a suicide line or I'm doing it out there, I have spoken with a lot of people that I did not agree with what got, with their actions and what got them into the situations they got into. I don't know how I do this, Aaron, because I don't consciously do it, but I end up, I guess, coming across as being someone who understands why they did what they did. And doesn't for some reason get my emotions or my feelings about what they did involved in the negotiations whatsoever. I think a lot of people that, like, in the criminal element, when you're negotiating with them, deep down inside, a lot of them realize that what they did was wrong. They know what they did was wrong. It's just that they need somebody to listen to them and to understand their anger or their reasons for why they did what they did. Not to agree with their method of taking care of that, because I don't do that, and I've never done that. And I think the minute that you start doing that is the minute that you lose all credibility, because they're not stupid. They know that you're, as a police officer, as a negotiator, as someone who wants to, bring peace to a situation, you're not going to agree with somebody murdering somebody. You're not going to agree with that. But you do understand what it is to be angry. We've all been angry at some point in our life, maybe not to the point where they want to kill somebody or have actually killed people, but you understand anger. And you understand someone who could be very, very angry. In this particular guy's situation, he believed that his wife was cheating on him with somebody at work. And maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. I have no idea. But I can understand an anger, in an angry person in a situation like that. I can understand you being angry. But again, letting him know that you do understand why he was angry, that you don't necessarily agree with why he did what he did, that his ways of resolving that, that situation, he doesn't either, because obviously he would rather not be in the situation he's in right now. If he was smart and had control of his emotions, he might sit down and talk to his wife and say, hey, what's going on? And can we solve this, or do we need to break up, or do we need to end this marriage, or what? But obviously he didn't do that. He let his emotions take over, and he realizes he was wrong. So, people sometimes just want to be heard. And at that particular point in their life, they can't find anybody to talk to that's going to agree with them or listen to them. And at least you listen to them. You don't agree with them, but you understand why they acted the way they did. And I think in all the situations where I talk to people that committed crimes or engage in activities that I don't agree with, whether I'm talking to a suicidal person that's a child molester, which is, like the last person in the world that I want to hang out with and have a drink, but they're going to kill themselves. They called in and I got to talk to them. Whether it's that kind of person or not, you have to at least listen to them because they have nobody to listen to. And that's your job as a negotiator is not to make decisions whether people are bad or good and to tell them that, because they know that what they're doing is wrong. They all know what they're doing is wrong. And unless they're extremely mentally ill and they don't reason, or they're under the influence of drugs, which can be a problem in negotiations. But for the most part, I think that having someone to listen to, because they've found somebody to listen to, having them look at you and look at you as someone who sincerely wants to listen to them, who cares about their well-being, and also values at least their opinions on things, so that you can establish trust. And you're not going to do that if you're holding back or scolding people all the time you're talking to them. So you don't lie to them, because that's the worst thing you can do, because once you lie to somebody, if you had any trust built at all, you're never going to get it back. But be honest with them, but listen to them and hear their story. I think that's a lot of them just want to have happen.
Yeah, I think what a great number of things there for our listeners. I mean, to understand without agreement, to suspend judgment, right? To be able to listen critically, really listen, and probably ask some good questions, and just to give them somebody who's heard. I think those concepts probably apply in other aspects too. So you've talked a little bit. I mean, beyond the initial 8 hours of training, I would have to assume that over the course there was additional training that occurred. Can you tell us a little bit? I mean, how does someone get more skilled, and how did you kind of get more skilled in this field as you pursued the path?
We had a practice. Our crisis negotiating team on LAPD SWAT had a practice of volunteering supposedly once a month to go over to the suicide lines and work. I did that one time and went over there and went, I kind of like this. It was practice talking to people in crisis, maybe a different crisis than what I was doing as a SWAT team member, but it's still crisis. It allowed me exposure to more people in crisis in different situations that I've never been involved in before. And the more I did it, I ended up volunteering and doing it, first going through their training, their civilian training there, for people that wanted to be crisis line operators. After going through that training, I decided to put myself on a shift once a week. So I arranged my days off, so I would go 1 day a week over there, on my own and volunteer. And I ended up doing, hours and hours of things. And the SWAT team basically fell behind and really didn't keep up on sending people over there anymore. They weren't really doing it. Most people didn't like to do it. I was gaining more and more knowledge. I got to the point where I remember the first time I picked up a phone as a SWAT team negotiator. They said, call in. We'd interrupt the line, establish another line with a throw phone, and allow them to only receive calls from us. They couldn't get outside calls. This is before cellular actually happened. And then when cellular happened, we had to shut down cellulars. But at the time, we would cut their lines and establish a new line just between us, so that there would be no outside communication. The only communication would be between the negotiator and the person inside the home that was barricaded. And I remember the first time they gave me the number and they said, call in, let's talk to this person, let's see if we can get them out. And I remember dialing that phone up and sitting there on the phone thinking to myself, don't pick it up. Please don't pick it up. I didn't want, because I had no idea what I was going to say to somebody when they picked it up. I was scared to death, honest to God. And that training over at the crisis negotiating suicide prevention network over there, Dee Hirsch in Los Angeles, and the numerous times that I'd gone over there, the shifts that I worked over there, got me to the point where I felt like there was nothing that anybody was ever going to tell me on the phone, whether it was in a crisis or hostage negotiation or whether it was in a suicidal situation, that I'd never heard before. And I was hoping just like I did when I served tactically on the unit, whenever I was in that capacity, that you gave me the worst one, the ugliest one. That's what I wanted. I wanted the challenge because that was something about doing that I lived on, I breathed, thrived on. So I felt like I'd heard so many different stories, so many different things, and I talked to so many different people that I wasn't going to be surprised by anybody. And I wanted people to pick up. I wanted to pass the phone around with everybody in the house. I wanted to talk to all of them. And I would say when we used to talk about the toolbox and putting more tools in the toolbox other than a hammer, otherwise you're treating everything like a nail kind of thing. That's the way it was with me. It was like I was just putting more and more tools in the toolbox. And immediately I went to work. I could fix electrical things, plumbing things, anything. I had tools to fix everything in that toolbox. And it was so comforting, and that comfort, I think really when you talk to somebody, that comfort gets transferred to that person you're talking to too. They realize that you're not a nervous wreck. You're not, all crazy and kind of like all worried about what's going to happen. You're like relaxed. And, this guy's got a gun. He's talking about killing people. And you're just like totally relaxed because, and that's a little addicting. Sometimes people pick up on it. It's contagious. They pick up on it and they start relaxing themselves. And then that's when they start relaxing their guards and they start spitting out stuff they normally wouldn't do. And you hear that information. And that's where you grab your hooks. That's where you get your info. You establish that relationship with people. They're comfortable talking with you. And, boy, that's a wealth of information. You open up the faucets and it all comes pouring out. And then you've got all this stuff to play with, all these tools and all these things to bend and twist people the way you want to do it. It's great stuff. I can only say that the only way you get good at negotiating is to do more negotiating. You can read every book in the world and it might help you through a particular incident every once in a while, but the way you get good at it is to actually do it.
Yeah, that listen to our podcast. So because we have people like you on. But I agree. You got to practice it, and then everything you're talking about, building your toolkit, and the different skills, and then being really well prepared, incredibly valuable. Another thing we so often talk about, Mike, is the power of review. And I remember the first time meeting you and talking about the work you were doing. You shared about this program you'd been part of, where you would go in and back into prisons, talk to people in a kind of a debrief situation that you had negotiated with to find out what worked. And I mean, not only did that so well mirror kind of the Army's after action review process, but it really struck, I thought, at the core of the idea of, as negotiators, kind of regardless of industry, do we review our negotiations? And could you tell us a little bit about like what you were doing and what you learned through that program?
Yeah, I accidentally ran across a detective that was assigned to the department's mental evaluation unit. That was her job, and it was part of their program was to go follow up on people, and these were mostly mentally ill people that were booked like 5150 and unable to care for themselves and stuff like that, and they were taken into custody, put on 72-hour holds or whatever, and then returned back to their neighborhood or something like that, into their homes. And they would have to do welfare checks on these people to see how they're doing, make sure that they hadn't, since the time they got back into their homes, obtained a rifle or a pistol or anything like that, and make sure that they didn't have anything dangerous around the house, and find out how their life is going, whether they're on their medications and things like that. And I was talking to her about it, and kind of a light bulb kind of came out of my head, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Because we run into a lot of those people in our SWAT situations. They're involved in crimes, and not only do sometimes they get housed in mental facilities, but they get housed in prisons and in psychiatric wards, and they're in custody there. And I thought, or sometimes they're not mentally ill at all. It was a crisis that put them in prison, but SWAT responded. And I will tell you honestly, and I don't know how it works for you in the military when you do this, because you guys are doing like a fantastic job, and something that obviously they didn't do when I was in the military, but you guys are so much smarter, and you figured out that it might be interesting to talk to people, which I thought was, wow, what a novel idea. But we went to these, I thought, well, why don't we go can we start looking at these people that we had were subjects of SWAT calls, of barricades, of crimes that SWAT was called out on, that we negotiated on, and talk to them and find out what their perspective was on the negotiations, what their opinion was about, what happened, what we could have done better, what we did bad, what we did that caused them to stay in there longer and made us have to tactically resolve something, kick a door down, explode a door or something like that, and go in and make an explosive entry, versus just having them talk them out, have them walk out the front door and drop the gun. And in those situations, why did you do that versus, wait for something else to happen? I took a lot of, I'll tell you what, I took a lot of negative feedback from that in police publications. They would publish us. You remember the New York Times did a story on us. They put that in a couple of the police magazines and things like that, and people read it. And the feedback was like, "Yeah, right. Now we're going to start listening to criminals. You idiots. What are you? What are you doing? That SWAT team? You're doing that." And I'm thinking, okay. So I had to deal with the machismo garbage that the typical. I joined the police department to be to shoot them up, bang, bang. I wanted to go after, the John Dillingers of the world, the Mansons of the world. And I'm not talking to anybody. They're all bad and they're all evil. And all I thought was, what? I don't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, I think there are some people where tactical intervention is the only way to go. But why not listen to these people? Even if you sit down with them for an hour, and all you get is 1 minute of something that might be helpful to you, that to me was a success. It was something that I could cause me to do my job better as a negotiator. A lot of times they spew a lot of garbage, a lot of anti-police stuff, and a lot of them are under the influence and they don't even remember what half the things that happened. But if I can get anything at all out of it, then I consider it a positive thing. And honestly, we got a wealth of information from these people, a lot of stuff that was very, very helpful. A lot of it that I threw out, that I will agree with people that you might consider that a waste of time. But the minute that I get something positive, it's no longer a waste of time. I don't mean to, ramble too much on this, but my logic was, Aram, it was that, there is a certain component, percentage of negotiations of being successful that is basically luck. It's just plain luck. And then there's talent. And then there's there's the way you do the job correctly and stuff like that. That's part of it too that's involved. But to say that there's no luck involved, I'd be lying, because there's luck. There's luck. There's a lot of luck. Sometimes you just say the right thing and boom, and you didn't even mean to do it, and you did. Or sometimes people just say, "The heck with you. You bore me. I'm tired of talking to you." They walk out. And you're just lucky. But what I wanted to do was minimize that percentage. I feel if you go into negotiations thinking that you're going to win because you're a really lucky guy and 80% of the time you're lucky and you end up winning, you're in for a rude awakening. So the more you can lower that percentage and increase the amount of knowledge you have at doing the job correctly, you have a better chance of being successful. So my goal was to do everything, to train, to teach, to read books, to go to seminars, to go to the West Point negotiation project, everything, to get as much information I can to lower that luck quotient, and to go into a situation with more skill than luck, a better chance of winning. That was the whole point behind it.
So, Mike, talking about just learning and being prepared, we so often learn from failures. Would you be willing to share a time when your negotiation team potentially learned a lesson the hard way through failure?
I can. I can talk specifically, I think, first off, about a situation that involved, I think, a failure of the unit, which I'm obviously part of, so then it would be a failure too for me. I was not a negotiator on this incident. I was a tactical team member. But we had an individual who was barricaded inside a residence with his wife and his daughter. And it was Christmas Eve. And they got into some type of argument that day that caused the wife to stab the husband. I believe he got stabbed in the hand by her by scissors or something like that. And his response was to basically beat her and then threaten her with a gun. And so she was held up inside the home with the child. And the call went out to us, to the SWAT team, to respond as a barricade incident with possible hostages inside. We deployed tactical people all around the location, and negotiations were established inside the residence with the suspect over telephone. I can't testify to the actual conversation going on between negotiators and the suspect. I assumed it wasn't going too well because we were getting together a tactical plan that we thought might have to be initiated quite quickly because we were worried about the health of the two hostages inside, because it seemed like the relationship was deteriorating, as well as our I guess our connection with him was also deteriorating. So we felt that it was going to be time to tactically intervene. So the end result was an explosive entry was made at the front door. He was taken into custody. Simultaneously, we broke out and flashbanged all the openings from the outside inside. We had narrowed down the location of where the wife and the baby were, and I was on that location where we made entry in through that window into that bedroom. Actually, as we went in the window, he was coming into the room because he was running from the front door. He saw us coming in the window and turned around and ran back the other direction, and was taken into custody by SWAT people coming in the front door. So he was taken into custody. We rescued the child and the mother, and it was mission accomplished. But then again, this wasn't the least, I guess, intrusive way of handling the situation. Negotiations would have been a better way, and I had the privilege of having to go to prison and talk to this individual who was in prison for that particular incident, and find out exactly what went on between him and the negotiator that he felt went the wrong direction and caused him to stay in and resist our request to come out and end it peacefully. And basically, the most important thing that I learned from that discussion with him, and again, this was I would say probably a rare instance where the actual person that we had the discussion with was not only not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I mean, he was totally sane and could make, I would have thought rational and reasonable decisions in a situation like that, even though his emotions might get the best of him at times. He had overheard a lot of the talk that was going on the outside and the inner perimeter that our SWAT team had on the location. We were pretty close to the location, mainly because we were preparing to make entry into the location. And to minimize the amount of time it took for us to get in once the explosions and breaches started occurring, we needed to be right up on the location. The problem was the people that were up on the location and their houses next door, including the rooftops and things where snipers were on, were very, very close to this location. And the conversation basically had to do with SWAT officers having their Christmas Eve with their families interrupted by this idiot that was inside this house. And the conversation went on and on about, all the different things that they were talking about. And I was on that outside perimeter, although I wasn't engaged in the conversation. I knew better not to do that. There were people that were, and I overheard some of their conversation. And what he was relaying to me was right on. It was what was going on outside. He knew what was going on outside. And really what happened was he knew that there were a bunch of people out there that didn't really care about him, even though he had a negotiator on the phone trying to tell him that we cared about him. He had a bunch of people standing outside his house who were on the same SWAT team talking negatively about him. So he's kind of torn with, believing what this negotiator is saying and what he's actually hearing, in real time on the outside of his location. That kind of communication destroyed any type of negotiations we had going at that time. So I can't really blame negotiators on that. But I learned that inside, and nowhere in a debriefing after that incident, and we were a professional, we debriefed everything afterward, did that subject even come up. Never even thought about it. You took into consideration the fact that this guy could have overheard half the things he was saying. So that was a huge learning experience for me. So regardless of whether people thought this was a negative thing to talk to people, that was a positive thing that I took out of that conversation. But it was definitely, even though it was a success when you look at it in paper, because everybody got out okay, except for the suspect got a little roughed up, and injured from the explosive entry and things. Everybody was rescued safely, but a lot of things happened that didn't have to happen. And that involved, court dates, lawsuits, trials and things like that. That we all won in the end, but could have definitely lived without. And they could have gone either way. Some of them, who knows? So that was a learning. That was a learning picture for sure.
Mike, it's a nice example of being aware of our surroundings, what messages are getting sent. Are there mixed messages? If you have multiple people involved, the sheer capacity of that, of that sort of an operation where it's not just the one negotiator on the phone, and there's all these other things going on. How challenging that can be. Kind of a last kind of question. I mean, you have volunteered as a crisis intervention counselor, on the contact care line. We see today, a lot of, more, it seems like more people in crisis, whether it's soldiers suffering from PTSD, or it's some of the, even kind of psychological effects of the last year and a half with COVID, and folks having been kind of in lockdown and some stuff, quarantined. So my sense is that, some of us in our day-to-day life, whether it's in business or personal life or wherever we're at, are probably interacting with people, maybe not full-blown crisis, but maybe on the edge. What advice do you have for us for how to take some of the things you've learned over the past, 30 plus years now, and say, how do I apply some of this in my kind of day-to-day life, in those situations?
Wow. So I guess the rumor's out that I'm a wizard. I'm not. I don't know if I can do that one for you really, really well. Let me say that I think there's a couple things that you touched on that are important that I think we need to be aware of if we're in situations like this, especially if we're dealing with the current generation of people right now. And I don't necessarily, and this isn't a negative thing to say about them at all. It's just something that I see a lot in negotiating and in crisis intervention with people of this generation, whether they be soldiers, not so much in that line of work as much as students and kids growing up too, and they're entering the business world now too. They're coming out of college and they're taking these positions, and whether they're in business or not, you still have to negotiate with them. And there's a thing that I see with this generation where there's not a lot of face-to-face communication anymore. People are texting people are emailing people. People aren't doing face-to-face kind of stuff anymore. And when that kind of stuff occurs, they have trouble communicating. They have trouble dealing with it. I think that is something that we need to be aware of when we negotiate with people. Sometimes it might be easier. I think a lot of the crisis lines right now are putting together text lines that a lot of them have. In fact, Contact Care does it as well. Put a lot of emphasis on doing suicide prevention through texting because that's what kids are comfortable with. I don't know that I don't like it. I think I do the best negotiation. I think anybody would do the best negotiation face to face, because then you can come across, if you are a sincere person or trying to come across as that way, that you're going to sell yourself a lot better than through a text and communicate a lot better. I think that's a problem with COVID. I think that's a problem with masks. We're not seeing people anymore. We're not interacting because we don't even get the face anymore. We don't see the expressions. We don't, whether it's just everyday, day-to-day work stuff. I see it on airlines. That's why a lot of the fights and communications occur on the aircraft, because people just don't realize how people are reacting to things because they can't even see their facial expressions. They have no idea. They don't know how to deal with them or deal with what's going on properly. I think people need to be aware that a lot of kids nowadays are growing up and now they're adults and stuff like that, and they were raised in an environment where they didn't ever have to experience losing. And I think in the military that might be a big deal too. Loss of life, loss of loss of friends, loss of things in general. We're all winners nowadays when we're growing up. We've got 9th place, 10th place, 12th place trophies. I mean, when I was growing up, first place got trophies. Everybody else went home crying. And we tried to fix what was better, and so that we'd someday get a trophy ourselves. But now everybody gets trophies. Everybody gets something. Nobody can be called a loser. And in the real world, there are losers. In the real world, everybody doesn't win. And to step out into that environment as a youngster who's never experienced that kind of thing can be very, very difficult to handle. So you have to know that. You have to understand that. You have to realize that our crisis, what we consider a crisis, is different than what they might consider a crisis. We might look at that and go, that's nothing. That's grade school stuff. But to them, it's the end of the world. It's like life-changing stuff. It's like decisions between life and death kind of stuff. And it amazes me sometimes to hear that, but I believe that it is in their mind. So that thing I think is really, really important to be aware of. All those differences. I mean, it's no different than, our parents' generations and everything. They're all different. We're all different. We need to realize that, but more so now, so that things are a lot different. I think communications is not, I mean, we pride ourselves on having all these ways to communicate, but they're not really. They're ways of, sending messages back and forth, but I consider communication, when you're talking about active listening, you don't do that through text messages. So you try to, but you can't be accurate sometimes.
I think so. I think the awareness around communication modality is so important. And I'm like you, Mike. I would prefer, face to face with someone. And I have to recognize that sometimes it's not feasible and sometimes it's not preferred by the other person. Right. And so, if my goal is to be successful, especially as you're talking about, people in crisis, meet them where they are. And I think that also kind of what you're saying about what someone else considers to be a great loss, and to show whether it's give some grace there, or sort of, it's different than how I might quantify loss, and be able to appreciate that. So I think it really is. That's very helpful advice.
I
Go
just
ahead.
want to add one thing, Aram. Add one thing. I've always found that I get my most success, I guess, feelings of success anyway, what I believe were successful negotiations or successful interventions, by pushing the question why about everything that anybody ever talks to me about and asks me about, or was involved in. Like, why did you kill your wife? Because I was angry. Why were you angry? Because she did this. Why does her doing that make you angry? And keep going, why, and figuring out what is the actual source of what's going on here, because that's what we have to get a hold of. And that's where you're going to grab your hooks from too, like we talked about earlier. So I think in any situation, any kind of crisis, like I said, if you assume, that people are telling you the truth when they're talking to you, and that whatever they're going through in life is a crisis to them, then you need to get to the root of why that is a crisis, and that's the way you fix it. You don't deal with what's sitting there right in front of you. You go backward and find out what caused it in the first place, and deal with that part, and that's how you fix it. So I have always, no matter how trivial things might seem to me, that people talk about them, thinking, why would you want to, I back of my mind thinking, why would you want to kill yourself over that? Why? And then I'm thinking, well, it doesn't really matter to me what my opinion is about it. Is I want to know why they want to do it. And I want to know, all the steps that got them to where they're at right now. So I think that's a key to being successful in just about every negotiation. Just something I was thinking about there. I don't know how important that is, but to me, it's very important.
Well, I think it's really important. And on that note, I think that's really summarizes, so much of this conversation. And I just want to say again, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you so greatly. Appreciate your work over the years. Appreciate you reaching out and joining us today. So thanks for taking the time. I'm going to pass it over to Nolan to kind of take us into wrap up.
Yeah, so appreciate it, Mike. This is a podcast that is all about taking action, and it's really about helping others elevate their influence through purposeful negotiation. So kind of wrapping up today's episode, I wanted to ask you, what's one key takeaway that you think that you could provide to someone who wants to become a better negotiator, and with all the experience that you've had in negotiations, how can they be successful in business and life, what have you, with negotiations?
Back to where I was talking earlier, Nolan, about, experience is the greatest teacher. Obviously, that sometimes is a haphazard way to go about learning something. If it's not that way, it's the next best is role playing. And I'm talking about even role playing. You've got a big negotiation coming up in the business world and a contract thing. You role play with your wife, have her play the other person. Do your best to come up with worst case scenarios and see how you'd handle those. I would say, I think I read somewhere something about how these prosecutors would always take in training the position of the defense attorney all the time, and try to get all the best questions, the things that you fear the most that you would hear from somebody. Get those out there and hear them before you get in a situation. You have to hear them and be prepared to answer them. And so I'd say always, I always, and I know my wife would probably, if she could hear this, she'd say, don't tell them that. But I always would play worst case scenario in everything that I ever got in, because then I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't act surprised, and I'd be able to move on and try to handle that. And I'd be already prepared. The other thing is to watch things like your podcasts, to read books. I can't overemphasize, I can't at all, about educating yourself. Read everything, even if read it, even if you can't even understand it. Read it, put it down, don't read it again. Read another book. Read everything on negotiation. Read everything that everybody's ever written on negotiation. You're allowed to keep what you want to keep, that you think is important, that you think might help you, and throw away what you don't. And the author's not going to take it personally. He's not even going to know. Read everything. Go to every class. Educate yourself. And that's what I did. And you walk into a negotiation then armed with everything you need to win and to be comfortable in that negotiation, because you've read it all. You can walk in there with a cocky attitude of knowing it all, but not show that, but in the back of your head thinking there's no way in the world that somebody's going to trip me up on this one, because I've read everything, I've done my homework. And it's as simple as, studying for a test when you're in school and going in and taking it and feeling good about it, not feeling nervous because you're prepared. And the way you get prepared is to read everything, watch everything on negotiation, listen to your podcast, listen to things that Aram says and stuff in his presentations and stuff, and educate yourself. Come with the tools, man, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point, especially for negotiators as they work to improve their game. So I'll turn it over to Aram for a key takeaway.
Yeah, the importance of building trust, and the things that myself or others may be doing that may reduce that. I think that's important. And the other one I would take, again, just so many from today, but the other one, I love the intentionality in the review process and the willingness to really learn. And if that's something that crisis negotiators can do and practice, that's something we all should be doing in our negotiations, is what's working, what's not, and let's fix it.
Yeah, I think my key takeaway from this episode was when, Mike, you had said that you were able to really get at active listening, even if you were talking to a child predator, someone who you obviously weren't necessarily able to connect with before the conversation, but during the conversation, you at least were able to connect with, to get to some sort of objective, and that was so that they would not kill themselves. So I thought that was extremely powerful, and something that definitely tells me that I need to improve my active listening skills to be able to disassociate like that when I need to. So thank you.
Yeah, Nolan, yep. I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happens. I swear to God, I've hung up the phone before, and I've had people that were in training listening to me, and they go, I can't believe you did that. That's not the same person I heard on the phone that I know in real life. And honestly, I would say I have no idea either. I have no idea how it happened. It was almost like a schizophrenic moment or something. I went into another person. I don't know, but I do it all the time, and I do it naturally.
Nope. I think that shows your level of training, your level of professionalism, and definitely the level that
I wish I could say. I wish I could narrow down. Yeah, I wish I could narrow down where it came from. I really don't know, but I think really, if you train enough and read enough and learn enough, it just happens natural. I think it does. You can walk away and be yourself. There's a switch that you have control over. You can turn it on and off. And as long as you're able to control that switch and nobody else is, negotiations will be good. Life will be good.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for coming on to the podcast today. Really appreciate you sharing all of your experiences, and definitely we'll have to have you back later to bring out some more stories, because I know we only touched on just the tip of the iceberg, and I know there's a ton more that you'd be able to share and give us some great insights into. So thank you very much for your time, and to the listeners, appreciate you listening to this episode. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.